Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Marketing Accountability Standards Board expert panel on sponsorship accountability metrics. And we're doing this on rather short notice because there's been a lot of news and activity on the opportunity for sponsorship using the name, image, and likeness. And if you paid attention to what we've said previously for MASB, we also add an extra I for influence with college student athletes. As you know, by way of background, the name, image, and likeness issue has been litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court. And there was a verdict in the O'Bannon versus NCAA case dealing with NIL. And that precipitated more action with regard to NIL legislation in the states you see listed there: Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, New Mexico, and Texas. Since then, I think there have actually been some other states that have passed laws. I was reading about Oklahoma being another one with some specific language in that state's rulings. And then there was also the concurrent case about the NCAA versus Alston. And essentially, that was about education-related compensation. And I don't know that it's the result of that particular case, but as of today, the Division I Council, I believe, actually voted on and passed the suspending of amateurism rules and allowed schools to adopt their own NIL rules, which are consistent with their respective state laws to those states that have the law. So what our purpose is here is the sponsorship accountability team at MASB has been discussing this topic for some time. We actually did a webinar back in January after any action at that point in time was set aside, at least at that point in time. And we're interested in this from a sponsor entity standpoint, whether that's a brand or a business. And what we thought we would do is we'd get back together some of the folks and organizations that participated in that session in January. So we have with us today Ray Katz from the Collegiate Sports Management Group and Michael Zoerb, who's from Opendorse. You may recall that Blake Lawrence of Opendorse was with us on that earlier video cast and shared some terrific insights. And yes, I'm Tony Pace. I'm the head of MASB. I've done a little sports marketing over the course of my career, not with college athletes because that wasn't an available opportunity. But what we thought we'd do today is talk about the various constituents with regard to NIL and what might be the opportunity and also the risk with being an early mover in terms of taking advantage to the now open playing field with regard to working with collegiate student athletes. So let me kind of pose a scenario to Mike and Ray that they can react to. But let's start from the point of view of a business or a brand. Is there going to be a first mover advantage? And I'll make it a little more real because this is the one that kind of came to my mind. You look at the college football space, which is obviously just about upon us, and Home Depot has a very visible and long-standing presence with College game day every Saturday morning, which is, of course, great timing because Saturday morning is probably a time that folks are going to make a trek to Home Depot, and they're there from 9 o'clock or even earlier Eastern time up to the kickoff of the noontime games. But if you were a brand like Lowe's or perhaps even Ace Hardware, and I'm sure there are others in that space, would you be looking at this saying, if I could find a couple of college football athletes who are fine players and good students, maybe I should be doing some sort of longer term social media effort with them across the season so that I can make an inroads into that tremendous asset that my competitor has set up. Is that a scenario, Michael, that you uh, might see playing out either in that circumstance or another one?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right along the lines of, brands getting creative to maybe pick into established things such as the Home Depot College Game Day partnership. This is an opportunity that allows them to potentially uh, dig in and get away some of that exposure that they're getting. I know as we've been in conversations, my role at Opendorse is on the brand side of things. And so a lot of conversations with brands and agencies, and there are a lot of people thinking in that way. I would say yes. Short answer, yes.
So Michael, in those conversations, without uh, letting on anything that's confidential, of course, do you think that the ability to act now on this is going to allow things to happen for this upcoming college football season, or is the less than 60-day window till the start of the season going to be an impediment to having lots of programs done with potentially football athletes?
Yeah, I think you're definitely going to see people who are interested in that first mover lift. In fact, I think you're going to see things happen on the very first day that it's available. Um, and that is people who are interested in, like you're saying, getting that first mover advantage. And one of the things that will come with that will be some of the, additional benefit of PR that comes with the marketing side of things. Um, you know, Especially since this is such a new thing, there's going to be coverage from, I believe, both the national scale as well as local level. Um, not not all of these brands that are looking to activate in this new opportunity with college athletes NIL are going to be at a national level. I do believe you'll see it on the local level as well, um, local and regional. In fact, I think a majority of the transactions will be at that scale, where that's essentially why Opendorse is built our marketplace technology is to handle the scale that's going to happen to where you have local business to local athlete all the way up to regional business to regional athlete and national business to national athlete. So I think you're going to see it on all levels, and I feel very confident sitting here on June 29th to say you're going to see it happen very quickly.
So again, without belaying any or betraying any confidences, you think there are people that are going to have deals in place ready to go, within 24 or 48 hours potentially?
Yep, I do. And I think, like I just kind of said, I think you're going to see it at different levels. I think you'll
Mhm.
see from the national level as well as the local level.
Great. So Ray, you and I have talked about first mover advantage over time. Ordinarily, first mover advantage means you may be able to, in a positive way, influence the ground rules for how things are done. And I think that would be a benefit for businesses and brands because clearly a lot of protocols and best practices are going to be established based on what happens early. Um, but many organizations are leery of having kind of negative fallout of things, especially given some of the experiences they've had in social media. How would you kind of assess the pro and the con of first mover as it pertains to social media messaging from student athletes that you would choose to be in some sort of collaboration with?
Well, I think there's always a pro in being the first mover if you do it thoughtfully and strategically and you assess the risks and you select athletes carefully. I mean, there's been a lot that's gone on in sports recently that if you were associated with certain athletes that may have done certain things during national anthems, you have a problem. But I think the advantage of what we're talking about here is not necessarily putting all your eggs in one athlete basket. NIL has is really poised to be off to a great start. Opendorse has done an amazing job proliferating the Power Five as the unquestioned leader across the Power 5 conferences in 65 schools. And the partnership with our company, Collegiate Sports Management Group, is designed to really take it across Main Street. And I think when you get outside the Power 565, you have an ability to say, my brand's about protection. I'm going to sign up 300 left tackles that have 1,000 social media followers each and get 300,000 instant messages out there, or 300,000 impressions. And the risk is way more diversified. Most athletes don't get in trouble. Most athletes don't say anything controversial. So when you're talking about that, the ability to pull down 2 of those 300 offensive left tackles is immediate. And so I think this actually mitigates the risk because of the speed to market and the speed to get out of the market if you have to.
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to back up what Ray is saying. With those are actual conversations being happen. Is there is a thought of going wider and shallow and not narrow and deep, meaning not putting all your eggs in one basket with one athlete at this level, and spreading it around, because it does minimize the risk of, these are young people we're talking about. So there's probably going to be things that happen that are not ideal. But to Ray's point, if a brand is engaging with 300 left tackles and a couple of them do something, they can go and essentially remove them from that campaign, and it doesn't mar the whole campaign. It just is a small fraction of and the brand gets to say, hey, we're working with 300 left tackles. So yeah, a couple of them got in trouble. But it's not something that it derails the entire concept that they're on with the campaign.
Well, having been an offensive lineman at a point in my life, the offensive linemen tend to be the most team-oriented, the most low-key about that kind of stuff anyway. So I think the risk on offensive tackles is actually pretty low.
Yeah.
Let me turn the question around a little bit. So in the example that you were choosing, if you're one of many, and it's only for a short period of time, if you or I were advising them, we'd probably say, listen, the money is an important piece of the transaction, but you'd really like to be in a situation where you're going to have longevity with people that you're working with, right? And I think certainly our counsel from MASB would be, you should look at everything that comes available to you. You should do things with businesses and brands that you have an authentic interest in, but you also would like to be doing things not as one shot. You'd rather be doing them as a sequence of things over time, because in 5 or 10 years, you're going to look back on this opportunity to get experience and exposure in addition to the compensation, and you're going to want to say, did I manage that properly? So I'd throw out there for you guys to think about and come back at, is it better for an individual athlete to say, I'd rather have fewer relationships that have greater longevity and have some depth to them, which is a little bit different probably than the business or brand kind of perspective on the approach you were suggesting?
I mean, I think that when you look at Opendorse and their substantial and really terrific athlete education process, all of this is going to be covered. And what I think Opendorse brings to the table is a unique perspective that covers all of the offensive as well as the defensive things that you have to consider, to put it into sports terms, to be most successful. I mean, I'm not going to steal Michael's thunder, so maybe you should describe that a little bit more. But certainly this is great work experience for these athletes that don't necessarily have an opportunity to have 15, 20-hour-a-week part-time jobs on top of what they're doing. This is some very practical experience that can give them 80% of the benefit at 20% of the time.
Yeah. No, I think, Tony, what you bring up about authenticity is key. And that is a key point in the education process that we do provide. So one of the things that Opendorse does is we do offer a product that the schools can invest in, which is Opendorse Ready. And that is essentially our education and training and preparation. And that's where we give a curriculum that student athletes can go in and access on their own to take lessons. And there's also education sessions with Opendorse experts, as well as our master class, which brings in experts from topics outside of our area, things like financial literacy or even personal brand building. And there's a variety of other topics that get covered by external experts that are part of that. But the overall goal of the Opendorse Ready program is to give the athletes the tools and the education they need to take full advantage of this new opportunity being granted to them. But one of the key lessons is exactly what you said. Don't just take any and all deals. Think through what is your brand and associate yourself with things that you genuinely want to be associated with. And that's going to be more impactful and engaging for both the student athlete and the brand if it's genuine and authentic.
Well, there's the old maxim that failing to plan is planning to fail, right? And I think that most student athletes, I think, would probably come up with a good plan, but then when the plan turns out a little differently than they had initially thought about it, they might set it aside versus revising the plan. So, our suggestion is to have a plan, and as you learn more, adjust the plan. Right? That's the real way to go on it. If you don't mind my asking, Michael, some of the conversation that we've been hearing has been that athletes will have either family members or family advisors or perhaps even agents involved in the mix, versus the student athletes being involved with these things directly. Do you have a perspective on that and what you're seeing or forecasting that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think that, the reality is a pretty small percentage of student athletes are going to have a true need for agent representation. And so the vast majority of student athletes are going to be kind of doing this and navigating this on their own. Your question around family and friends potentially being involved, I'm sure that will play in as well. But when it comes to, the vast majority of student athletes, they're going to be kind of on their own with this. And that's why we're trying to work with schools to get the education in front of them. And then that's why we're using Opendorse Deals, which is the marketplace platform. We're trying to make it as transparent and as possible. So since we do know that the majority of the student athletes will be kind of encountering these opportunities on their own.
So when we spoke with Ray and Blake back in January, Blake made the very interesting and I think very accurate statement about people are going to be surprised how well female student athletes do, because they have very well developed social media followings. They're very active there, and they're generating great content that people want to see. I assume, because you're nodding your head, you're seeing more of that, and you think that prediction is going to hold pretty well, right?
Yes, I do think so. And the topic of this session is first movers. I do think you'll even see some first movers who capitalize on that exact thing by catering or tailoring campaigns specific to female student athletes.
And any hints of what schools it might be, or no? Too early, huh? You don't want to be that much of a first mover, right?
Nope. Yeah, I don't think at this point they probably want us getting too much out there. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you see, brands in specific categories or industries where it makes sense to work with female student athletes, taking advantage of this newfound opportunity and reaping the benefits of it.
Great. So one of the things that we've been talking about over time is whether or not schools in states that did not have laws passed would be disadvantaged And we may have even had that point of view a week or two ago, but now it really seems as though the conversation on that is flipped, because if you're in a state that doesn't have any rules, the school or the conference can establish its own rules. And that seems to potentially be beneficial both to the school and the conference and the student athlete, and perhaps even for the brand or business being involved. Do you guys have a perspective on that in terms of where we sit today with regard to some of those rules?
Well, I mean, my view is that if a school decides and a conference decides that the student athlete can use the school marks in return for either a royalty fee or something else, that's going to be a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about the best basketball player at Stony Brook, Olani. I forgot his first name. He just transferred back from a Power 5 school, I think Miami. And he's worth 10 times as much money with the Stony Brook marks as without the Stony Brook marks. And so if he can use them and pay a 15% royalty to the school, two things are going to happen. One, he's going to make a lot more money. Two, the school's going to make more money. And three, the school's going to be more likely to use Opendorse, which is not the cheapest, but is the best solution out there. Right now, there's a subset of schools that's just saying, well, I'm not making money anyway, so I'm just going to go with the cheapest solution for NIL. So I think a lot of things are going to happen if, in fact, it is possible for that to be a rule that the conference and or the schools establish, which, at least as far as I'm concerned, is still to be determined.
Yeah, so I was privy to some conversation about schools granting intellectual property, and there are a variety of points of view out there about what's going to happen. Somebody I know suggested that a student athlete could identify herself or himself as a member of the school's team, but they wouldn't necessarily get the IP in terms of the logo and everything else. And I don't know if that was kind of a moderate point of view, therefore it was gaining ground, or how that's going to play out. Interestingly, if my reading of the Oklahoma State rules are correct, the student athlete is not going to have the ability to use the marks in that state. But I don't, there so much of this is happening so quickly. I would imagine that if an athlete in a particular state was disadvantaged because of that, there may be some relatively quick reconsideration of those circumstances.
I think there's a really good chance this could all just ramp up to whatever the level SEC football decides is okay.
Really?
And that's going to be pretty much its free reign.
So let me kind of circle back to first mover advantages for businesses or brands. One of the things that I think doesn't get enough attention is when you start doing something that's relatively new, there are lots of other people who are interested in and kind of notice what you're doing, right? So back when I was selling sandwiches, we worked with an athlete coming out in the NFL draft every year. And once we started doing that, people that we would talk to about being the selection, several years down the road, they would reference the fact that they remembered when we worked with Reggie Bush, or when we worked with Brady Quinn, or we worked with Ndamukong Suh, or we worked with CJ Spiller, right? And all of your potential future relationships may be influenced by the fact that you take this step now and that you get known for something at a very early stage, because the kids say, I want to do that when I get to be at that level, and that's kind of a goal of theirs. And any thoughts about that and the potential value of that, Michael or Ray?
Yeah, I think you will definitely see programs get established by brands that become kind of things that athletes strive to be part of. As you mentioned, with your previous example with Subways, they saw that, and that was something that they hoped and worked for, is when I get to that level, I'd like to get that offer or be part of that group. I definitely think you're going to see that with NIL opportunities. and brands that establish a good enough idea that has longevity and starts to create a reputation behind it, then for sure you're going to have student athletes looking to try to become part of that group.
So let's jump to the conferences and schools for a second, and their potential advantages and also risk as it pertains to first mover. Ray, you mentioned the SEC a couple minutes ago. The SEC's obviously got great athletics, really across the board. If you're a College World Series guy like I am, you're watching it now, and it's Vanderbilt and Mississippi State playing Vanderbilt to essentially continue the championship they won a couple years ago, since there was no competition last year, and Mississippi State trying to win for the first time, but they're both SEC schools. If you're a conference and you're a first mover, that probably, even if it's not intended, that's also going to have kind of a recruiting advantage, because the student athletes will say these set of schools in this conference are interested in helping here, and as such, they probably will get an even longer look than perhaps others that are not moving so quickly. Is that a reasonable expectation, or what are your guys' thoughts about that?
I think it's a reasonable expectation at all levels. From Alabama to a very creative, innovative program like Stony Brook, right down through Division III and Tufts. I mean, I could envision Tufts having a whole bunch of athletes working with a particular root beer company. I'm sorry, a ginger ale company. And all of a sudden, Tufts is a hot place to go to school, and other athletes want to be part of that. So I think it's going to be across the board, and it's going to be interesting to see when I view it more as a second mover advantage, right? First is always slow, but once there's a first mover, the second, third, and fourth people move amazingly quickly. And I think we're going to see that.
So this is the second mover being smarter then in that regard, Ray, because they're gonna escape any pitfalls.
I think the second mover is going to escape a pitfall if they're at a different level, right? Like if Alabama does it, and then all of a sudden Elon says, well, they're doing it, I'm going to do it also. I don't think they have an advantage or a disadvantage. I just think they have the advantage of letting someone else go first, but they're going to be in a great position. If Alabama goes first, I think Georgia could be at a disadvantage if they're second, because they're in the same consideration set.
Right.
Yeah, you're definitely seeing it already, where this NIL opportunity is turning into recruiting battles. Basically, it's similar to the facility arms race, or the weight room and locker room, who has the best weight room, locker room, who can provide athletes with the most NIL opportunities is the next frontier of recruiting battles.
I'm not going to identify the person, but I was on a Zoom meeting with a Division I athletic director who's really spectacular, and definitely not a top tier athletics program as far as the revenue sports are concerned. And that person said, I already have 2 of these services, and Moneyball would indicate I'm going to go and buy a third and a fourth one if that can help my athletes, because I'm going to get more out of spending a couple of $100,000 on this than upgrading my football strength coach or upgrading my special teams coach. This is going to have massive impact on my entire athletic department. So I can't spend enough.
So if I can change the subject slightly there for a second, Michael, if there's lots of dreams of great benefits of NIL, and people can have great expectations of it, but might there be a risk for the schools that there's great expectations that are not delivered on for a lot of the student athletes, and we're back revisiting what went wrong with this? The education side, which I know you do, seems to be being outsourced at most schools versus doing kind of things internally. And somebody I know said that was because they didn't necessarily want to assume the risk if things didn't play out the way people were hoping.
I think it's a combination of factors. You know, I think one is I know that it seems like we've been talking about NIL forever, but a lot has happened in the last 6 months. And the reality of the situation is external parties like Opendorse can typically move faster than institutions. And so it takes a lot to get, you know, if they wanted to do this internally, they'd have to, you know, institute a department and a program and hire somebody and build a curriculum and do all that, which that process on campuses can take a little longer, where groups like Opendorse can come in and provide that immediately, basically. I do think that it isn't a situation at a lot of the schools we work with anyway, where this is just you know, outsourced and that's it. It's usually part of a bigger comprehensive plan. We're seeing a lot of collaboration with universities, trying to bring in the athletic departments, trying to bring in the university side, the academic side, and implement, you know, some cross campus collaboration opportunities. So a lot of times it's not just we're relying on Opendorse to do our education. We're just a piece of an overall puzzle towards this.
So let's jump back to the student athlete for a second. So if you guys will indulge me, I'm going to tell you a story from the old days, which is meant to hopefully inform the student athletes a little bit. So I once worked on an enormous Coca-Cola promotion, which was actually, I think, the first Coke promotion that ran for more than 1 year. It was called Monsters of the Gridiron. And essentially there was an NFL player from each NFL team that we turned into a monster using actually the wonderful makeup and wardrobe people who did the Broadway show Katz back in the day. And we had to pick players from every team. And there was a certain player that we wanted to use from the Green Bay Packers. But he had actually done an autograph session for Pepsi right as he was getting out of school. And he got a modest 4-figure amount for that autograph session. And as a result, the thinking of Coke at the time was that they couldn't sign up with this guy. Now the punchline is that guy happened to be Brett Favre, and you know, Brett went on to win in the Hall of Fame. And when I see or talk to some of my old friends from the Coca-Cola business, it was should that decision really have been made? In hindsight, you probably would say that the Coca-Cola brand would have benefited from being associated with Brett Favre. I'm not sure what kind of monster we would have made him for Monsters of the Gridiron, but at the end of the day, it's another reason to think about who you're getting associated with and the potential longevity of that, because these decisions can have longer term ramifications that are not even, you know, in the field of vision at the time that you're making your initial decision about who you work with.
Yeah, no, that's a good story, and you're definitely there's going to be more stories like that. Unfortunately, it is part of navigating this new opportunity, to where, you know, like as you mentioned earlier, trying to potentially work with fewer companies but get in deeper with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a balancing act, because this is also student athletes are taking advantage of a moment in time that is kind of fleeting. Like they're not going to be ever as popular as they are during that 4-year stretch for most athletes. Some will go on to play professional, but we're talking about, you know, 500,000 student athletes, and what is there, roughly 5,000-6,000 professional athletes across all the sports any given year. So
Right.
Again, you're talking about 99% of student athletes. This is the pinnacle of their career and probably the pinnacle of their stardom. And so they have to balance that out with, you know, the opportunities that are coming their way. But yeah, I think that'll be part of the learning curve. And I'm sure there will be more examples of somebody jumping on a first deal that ended up costing them a better deal down the road, for sure.
Yeah, the guy I mentioned did all right, so I don't think it's a big
Okay.
deal for him. But
He probably didn't lose sleep over it in the end.
no, no. Uh, all right. So if we're sitting here doing a retrospective on the first 2 years of NIL in the summer of 2023, what do you think some of the lessons are going to be at that point in time? And if you don't mind me putting on the spot, I'll ask you that first, Michael.
Yeah, no, I think, obviously nobody has a crystal ball, but I think especially the way that this is unfolding, I'll be honest, I would, my preference would have been that there be a little bit more structure behind this thing. It's kind of launching with a little less clarity than what I think everyone involved would have liked, but it is what it is. So I think early on, you're going to see a lot of activity, a lot of learnings, a lot of adjusting. You mentioned school policies and state laws earlier. I do think that you will see some adjusting of those, where maybe a school starts out with a certain set of policies or restrictions, and then once they realize that that puts their student athletes at a disadvantage, and in turn then the institution at a disadvantage when it comes to recruiting, they'll adjust. So I think you're going to see a very wild start to the NIL era, but I don't think that's what will hold out when we're talking about 2 years from now. This will eventually settle in. There will eventually be, federal legislation that will put everybody back on the same playing field, and there will be a settling in of a groove. When that is, I don't know. Hopefully 2 years from now, we're not still talking about what people on with different sets of rules and so forth. But I think you're going to see it start out really kind of hectic and then settle into a groove. And 2 years from now, you'll see that there will be fairly small group of people that get significant opportunity from it, and then a pretty big group of people who are able to create modest opportunity from it. But the good news is all of it is better than what there was previously.
So to the topic of the conversation, which is first mover advantage, do you think we'll be sitting here in a couple of years saying that the first movers had an advantage and were able to sustain it, or would that more likely have dissipated over time?
That's a good question. I do think there is an advantage for these first movers. Like, they are going to get additional exposure and awareness just because it's something new. But sometimes, the news cycle in this country is pretty short. And so, some of those might go by the wayside, but they will have at least received a short, stint of a first mover advantage. And then the really good ideas that come out from this will be long lasting. Even, some of the ideas that were just kind of jokingly thrown around here with, right guards, the top right guards from the country. I think you'll see some fun stuff that are done. I again don't want to spill the beans on any privy conversations, but there's some brands who are thinking about this opportunity in some very creative ways and looking to utilize maybe some of the unsung heroes on the field of play. And so I think some of those ideas will stick around because they have good ideas last, right? So I think it'll be interesting. I do think it'll be, like I said, very hectic to start and then kind of settle into a groove, and we'll kind of have a better idea of which of these things have some staying potential.
Yeah, I'll put another plug for offensive linemen. They're team players and not divas, right? Ray, what's your thought about 2 years from now if we're sitting here saying what went well, what might we have wished had gone a little differently on NIL?
I think the only thing that we're going to wish that had gone differently was maybe a little more structure, as Michael said up front, just to really level the playing field, take some of the risk and uncertainty out of it, and get people just to throw themselves into it, really on with more enthusiasm, or even more enthusiasm, and with less risk. I would say that the authenticity of athletes relative to any other form of IP will absolutely make brands.
Mhm.
It will make brands that step up, whether it's newer, smaller niche brands or whether it's established brands that you wouldn't think of. I could envision an auto brand just really stepping up and going above and beyond, let alone the more endemic brands. I think exciting to me, it's going to be a huge differentiator of which consultants, advisors, and agencies are really great and deliver the goods and which ones don't. The people that say, all right, we really understand how athletes can fit into, enhance, and support a platform versus just saying, well, nobody ever got fired for buying more ESPN or nobody ever got fired for being an NFL sponsor or an NCAA sponsor. It's going to be a massive differentiator. And the thing that excites me the most as someone that's been in this business for a long time and also is an educator is that student athletes absolutely at different levels will build business relationships, as you've stated on so many occasions, Tony. And that's going to be something that's long lasting. Some schools are going to do it better, and they are going to, as a result, elevate themselves as part of the process.
So that's great. I actually wanted to see if you guys, what you thought about this perspective. I actually think that the NIL opportunity plus I, of course, for influencer. I think that that's actually even bigger than some people realize because student athletes are the association with them is such a positive, given the level of commitment that it takes to play a sport at the collegiate level, and also to be a student. Right, they represent so many great characteristics that people want to focus on the potential downside if there's some sort of issue in social media or something. But boy, the upside is pretty awesome when you're dealing with people that are that dedicated, that committed, and really working hard to succeed athletically and academically. It's really it's really invigorating in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of businesses and brands would benefit from it, perhaps beyond what they realize.
Mm-hmm.
In this time, you can have much longer content. You're not limited just to a quick piece. And, storytelling is such a big part of marketing that storytelling with student athletes who are authentically linked to your business, to your brand, is actually a very powerful piece. So I think that's going to be a great benefit going forward. I guess our consensus is there is a first mover advantage. I'm probably the one who thinks it would sustain the longest, but it's like anything. If it's done for a short term PR benefit, it's not going to sustain. But I think businesses and brands that move on the side of the student athlete and continue with that, there's going to be some brand halo that's created for them in that regard.
This is an exciting opportunity because this NIL era is going to create an abundant amount of opportunities for athletes. And you're really going to see some of the, like you mentioned, the upside. You're going to see content creators create content. You're going to see people who are interested in pursuing careers and things in teaching and coaching do camps and lessons. There's just so many avenues you can go with this that I'm excited to watch it unfold.
Well, there's a great story from the military where a number of generals over time made specific requests for somebody who was an athlete at West Point or at Annapolis because they knew they could count on them to get a tough task done, right? Because they had to have the intellectual and the physical and mental chops to get it done.
No doubt. I mean, the news cycle sensationalizes some of the negative stories, but 99.9% of the stories of student athletes are stories of diligence, perseverance, grit, hard work, time management, and all the kinds of characteristics that brands would want to be associated with.
Guys, thanks for doing this on such short notice. I'm happy that we're doing it on Tuesday, June 29th. So it's actually prior to NIL taking place. I would anticipate that we actually are going to want to do another one of these, perhaps in 60 or 90 days and kind of do an update. So thanks very much for being with us today. And we look forward to continuing the conversation and hopefully adding some perspective, which is helpful to all the various constituents.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here and happy to circle up again in 90 days and we'll have some real examples of what has happened.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.